Bom dia, boa tarde, boa noite, or whatever the case may be. My name is Marcus, and I am the host of the Black Brazil Today YouTube channel, as well as the blackbraziltoday.com blog, where I analyze Brazil from the perspective of race. So tonight, the article that I'm going to be taking a look at is called Brazilian Funk and the Animalization of Society. This is a topic that it's going to come up from time to time because I do think it is an important facet of Brazilian society that we really need to look at to understand what the dynamics in the environment is, in Brazil today. Coming out of the recent election, we can see that Brazil is in some ways divided between two different ways of thought. With the last election that brought Lula da Silva back to power for his third presidential term, he was president, from 2003 to 2010 for 2 terms. Then he was replaced by somebody in his cabinet, the first female president, Dilma Rousseff. And in the middle of Dilma's second term, she was actually impeached. Now, some people say it was legitimate to take her down. Other people say it was a reaction to just try to get the left out of power in Brazil. She was replaced by an interim president named Michel Temer. And then there was an election. He finished out her term. And then there was another election. And Jair Bolsonaro, who a lot of the press, both American and Brazilian, were defining as the Brazilian Trump, a guy with very conservative views. A lot of people, obviously people on the left, did not like him, but Bolsonaro had a very strong conservative base. He appealed to a lot of people who didn't like the direction that the country was going in after, what was that? We could say about 16 years of the Workers' Party being the party in charge of the country. During that reign of the PT, it's called the Partido dos Trabalhadores in Portuguese, or the Workers' Party in English. We saw a lot of things come out of the left. Black people, Black Brazilians saw some improvement in life. There were situations and studies that showed that a lot of Black people were able to climb out of poverty because of the politics of Lula and then Dilma. A lot of Black people managed to get to the university because of the quota system that really picked up steam. It didn't come in under Lula, but it picked up steam under Lula. I believe some of the first universities started with the affirmative action programs in like 99 and 2000. And the programs have only grown since then. So it's funny because I can gauge from looking at Brazil as well as the United States that it's not an easy topic to be able to define or be able to come to an agreement about, okay, how much of what the left is saying is true and how much of it is just propaganda. When I have discussions, years ago, I would not have been able to have such a discussion. I considered myself completely leftist at that point. But in the last, I want to say 4 to 6 years, I've just been seeing some extreme things coming out of the left that makes me question, like, okay, should Black people really be on this leftist train? And some of the same stuff that I've seen, being used in the United States is some of the same trickery that I'm seeing used in Brazil. And, people have to come to their own conclusion. None of us really knows what's actually going to happen, as if, we had some type of crystal ball. But, I look and I consider some of the things that's coming out of the left in the United States these days. And it's not necessarily something that I agree with. So then with that in mind, it just makes me wonder, 20 some years ago, when I saw Lula come on the scene and, first win the presidential election after, I think it was his third attempt, when he finally won at the end of 2002, and he became president in 2003. A lot of people on the left who had been, rocking with Lula for some years, they were obviously excited. They were ecstatic to see, one of the, what they call o povo, one of the people, somebody who came from a poor background, to win the presidential election in Brazil. So then 20 some years ago, I looked at that and said, wow, that's a great thing. That's a great achievement for Brazil. Here it is some 20 years later, 20, you could say 22, about 20, you could say 20 years. If he won the election in 2002, then he won the election 2022. That makes 20 years. And I'm looking at, what 4 more years of Lula is going to look like. And I'm not necessarily just jumping for joy because I'm seeing what's going on with the left in the United States. And a lot of things that, yeah, I say this often, a lot of things you see happening in the United States, eventually you'll see them happening in Brazil. Brazil is almost as divided as the United States is. A lot of people are fed up with Joe Biden and the left in the United States. The same is true. We're going to see what's going to happen with Lula, but I can already say that because that election was so highly contested, I think Lula won by maybe 0.5 to 1% of the election vote. It was an extremely tight presidential race, which just shows you that Brazil is ultimately very divided from, the more liberal aspects of the country to those who want to keep, stay on the more conservative side. To get a gist at the racial situation, I have to go even further and look at other topics. And this is why I'm wanting to introduce some other topics beyond just strictly race, because even though this article that I'm looking at today, Brazilian Funk and the Animalization of Society, doesn't necessarily have to do directly with racial politics, but because Brazilian Funk has such a close connection with cultura negra or Black culture, this culture coming out of Black culture and coming out of, the favela slums out of Brazil, you can't help but connect the two. So in order to look at another slice of society, this is another topic that I really need to go over. Obviously I've known about Brazilian funk for a number of years, but quite honestly, it just wasn't the type of music that I was attracted to. It's it's somewhat similar to some of the stuff that you would hear of like Miami-based music in the late 80s, early 90s, mid 90s and on. I wouldn't even say just Miami. I think just Florida in general comes with this, this fast tempo type of beat, dance music. But it's just nothing. It's just nothing that really caught my attention. I just like, I don't really care for a lot of where music is going these days. It's just a extreme lack of instrumentation. This is something that I grew up on. So you come up with a music that just basically has some computerized beats and drum machines, and it leaves a lot to be desired for me. So anyway, besides the musical aspect of Brazilian funk, it's like what else comes out of that culture, and why is there such one side of the country that's so totally into it, while you have another side that totally rejects it, like. There's a saying in Brazil that says "funk é lixo," which means, funk is trash. There's a lot of people that feel that way. And just to be, to analyze a situation fully, you do have to look at what both sides are saying. So that's why today I'm going to take a look at this piece. It's actually 2 articles that I put together just to get into the origins of Brazilian funk, and then what some people are saying. Well, we'll say a lot of people, perhaps half of the country, don't really dig where funk music is going, what it says for the country, where it's leading the culture, how Brazil is represented outside of Brazilian borders. So anyway, let's get into these. The first article is something that I told you before. I really like going over to the Quora.com website, find all types of good conversations over there. And Brazilians, they contribute a lot to some of the conversations over at Quora. If you can read Portuguese, you can read along. So this article that I'm doing today, the first of 2, the first one is called "What Social Contribution Does Rio de Janeiro Funk Provide to Brazilians?" And so this is the original article, and it's by a lady named Laura Costa. So she just did a quick overview of the origins of funk, where it came from, where it's going, how it's currently represented. And to be sure, I've done a lot of this myself, because this is an article I did back in 2013 called "Black Rio, the Rise of Black Music and Dances and the Interpretation of Black American Soul Music in Brazil." So what we call the funk, funky carioca particularly, they arose out of 1970s dances in major Brazilian cities like Rio, Sao Paulo, Salvador, Belo Horizonte, where instead of people just coming together for, samba get-togethers, the main musical rhythm in Brazil. A lot of the DJs and people who were into Black culture started importing Black American soul and funk music. And you had Black Brazilian teens and young adults who just fell in love with this beat. And so these are some of the pictures you would see from some of those dances. This is an article taken from a 1976 article in a major newspaper called Black Rio. And it just talked about how Black Brazilian youth were connecting with this Black music coming out of the United States. So the article was from the Jornal do Brasil newspaper called the Orgulho Importado de Ser Negro no Brasil, Black Rio. That means the imported pride of being Black in Brazil. So a lot of people rejected, Black Brazilian teens emulating what the culture and the music and some of the dances, some of the handshakes that they were emulating coming out of the United States. It was very appealing to a lot of, Black Brazilian teens at that time. Some of these are a couple of album covers from some of the top Black artists who were mixing. Either they were mixing Brazilian rhythms with Black American soul and funk, or they were copying it, These are some of my favorite artists. When I discovered this whole Black music movement from the 1970s, it was just something fascinating to discover. So these are just some of the pictures that you would see. There's been a whole lot of this group kind of reminds me of how Funkadelic was looking at the time. This is União Black. This is Dom Mita. These are just some pictures from some of those Black dances, how they started off in the 1970s. And like I said, in major cities in Brazil, these are kind of the origins of the Bailes funk, the funk dances that I'm going to be talking about today. Not just funk dances, but just the funk culture in general, because people are questioning, is this a good thing for Brazilian society, or is this something we shouldn't be rolling with? Right. So if you want to get even more, eventually I'm going to cover these articles from the blog on this, on the YouTube channel, because it gives you a good, solid base for the connection to today's funk dances, because they started here with Black Brazilian teens imitating what they saw coming out of the United States. These are just some of the great pictures that you can find online. There's been documentaries and books written about this period in Brazilian history. So anyway, with that said, let's get into this first piece. What social contribution does Rio de Janeiro funk provide to Brazilians? Intriguing picture we got going on here. I mean, it kind of speaks for itself. But this is, you see something like this going on at a Brazilian, funk party. So Laura Costa, this is what she wrote on Quora. I'm kind of piggybacking, I've already, like I said, I introduced this topic already, but, let's listen to what she has to say. She says, funk is a musical style that emerged through American Black music in the late 1960s. In fact, funk originated from soul music having a more pronounced beat and some influences from R&B, rock, and psychedelic music. There is a very interesting and complete article about the history of American original funk music, origin of funk and its history over the decades. For anyone who is a fan of Black music, soul, and blues like me, it is a delight for the ears. So let me see. The article that she linked to was this article by Juliana Bezerra. She wrote an article called Origem do Funk, the origin of funk. She says, funk emerged in the South of the United States in the 1960s. It was created by musicians such as Horace Silver, James Brown, George Clinton, among others. And she just, she gives you an overview of how, funk came to be, developing from R&B and soul, and then making that move into funk by the mid 60s. A lot of people say the funk era started with the James Brown song, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. Some of the people who picked up that and made a Brazilian branch of soul and funk in Brazil were people like Tim Maia and Tony Tornado. One of these days I'll have to talk more about that. But this is the article that this Quora piece is referring to. She actually has up a link to a YouTube video, the Studio One Funk, the original. I'm assuming this is a collection of like funk soul classics or whatever, but when you click on it now, it's been taken down for whatever reason. So anyway, until the early 1990s, the music of the peripheries and favelas was samba and its pagode version. This is Romulo Costa. I'm supposing this is his wife. He was part of the Som 2000 and later the Furacão 2000 sound team. He exploded this music. I mean, he's been in this game, I think, from the 1970s, and it just when what they call Brazilian funk made it started transitioning over into Miami bass. And, his some of the parties that he was having is what blew this sound up. So it says Romulo Costa's Song 2000, later known as Furacão 2000, had existed since the 1970s, but it promoted dances totally restricted to the favelas. Again, the slums in the Brazilian slums, they call them favelas, offering a kind of syncopated music of American rhythms, such as Miami bass, which is a variation of hip hop. Very common among young people of the time who frequented the places as an alternative to the traditional samba de roda. Again, samba being the most traditional rhythm. You still hear samba. Samba is alive and well in Brazil. Every year during Carnival, you hear, the sambas. Those are the samba rhythms that you hear usually during a Carnival procession. Again, this is Romulo Costa. So this is an article, 50 Years, Funk Without Prejudice. So let's see, funk soul, since the dances were repressed in the favelas in Rio to the 1970s, it completes 50 years. So he's, like I said, he's been in this game for over 50 years. In the 1990s, the songs talked about the reality and local rivalries or romantic themes, funk melody. And from the 2000s, they began to have an explicit sexual connotation or related to the exaltation of violence and drug trafficking factions. A lot of people I know in Brazil talk about that because they can remember listening to some of those original funk, Brazilian funk songs. And again, when we say funk, we're talking about this kind of like a electronic dance music that you would hear at a club. Again, think about the Miami bass sound. This is what they call funk in Brazil. And a lot of people talk about how when those first funk songs, original funk songs was coming out of Brazil, they were really fun. They were melodic, they were kind of romantic. But then somewhere along the way, the lyrics just took on an extreme sexually explicit lyrics in a lot of the songs. And a lot of people were turned off by that. Now, of course, there are a lot of people who participate in the culture. And this is why I say you have these two sides of Brazil. One that's I guess you could say fighting for the soul of the country. Which side is going to win out? So the social contribution, in my opinion, is extremely negative since it highlights and puts in evidence what is worse and most degraded in the peripheral environment and stimulates early eroticism in children. I don't think that such a reality should be masked, but also, in my opinion, it should not be glamorized. So a lot of news reports have been coming out about what goes on some of these, what they call bailes funk, the funk dances. I've heard about stories like this for years. Teenagers participate in train sex at funk dances with up to 10 partners without condoms. And you hear these stories of girls turning up pregnant, coming out of these dances and not knowing who the father is, right? Everyone knows what happens inside the slums, but it's not necessary to impose the torture of the walls on working people who also live in the slums and are held hostage to loud music, drug use, and explicit sex acts in the middle of the street. Here you have, what can we say? Youngsters perform old sex on a singer during a funk show in Aracaju, Sergipe, which is in the country's northeast. Again, when you dive into, stories about, funk dances, you hear this type of stuff all of the time. So it's like, okay, would you want your daughter participating in this? Just a question. I mean, maybe if you're a teenager, your early 20s or mid 20s, whatever, maybe you're participating in this and it's just like, oh, get over it. We're just having fun. But okay, let's look and see. Say, okay, is this healthy behavior for society as a whole? Ask yourself that. Funk only reflects the degradation of the Brazilian people, in particular, how Rio de Janeiro fell into frank decay. It is a reflection in the mirror of a sick society condemned to violence and total abandonment by the authorities. There is no interest whatsoever on the part of any of the parties involved, authorities and society, in promoting another kind of culture because current ideologies like to maintain that which arises spontaneously in degraded environments should not be hampered by white or bourgeoisie culture. And this is in essence the argument that's going on. It's like anything that comes from a poor or black roots in its origin, one of the first things that people say is because, okay, it's white, middle class, bougie society that wants to lock down, black funk dance. Well, it's not specifically black funk dances, because you go to a funk dance, you see all types of people there, but it's totally connected between favela and black culture in Brazil. And so the argument is you're trying to shut down something because it's of poor and black origins, and that's not cool. This is ours, leave us alone. Um, what's intriguing, and one of my contacts in Rio was explaining this to me. If you look into the origins of disco and then how hip hop rose up out of that, there's some similarities here, because there was a time in disco music in the United States, and disco also was copied in Brazil. They had their own version of Brazilian disco music, but the powerful record labels in the United States, they started interpreting, making interpretations of this disco music. You notice that in the 70s, there was great disco music and there was terrible disco music. And by the time the big record labels got involved and, the big money interest, they were just creating all types of disco music that just didn't have much quality. And thus it gave it a really bad name. So once big money gets involved in it, it turns into something else. And a lot of people are saying that the whiter middle class society is also trying to nibble and how can we say appropriate facets of funk culture in Brazil. That's another intriguing story. Again, I know I say it all the time, but another story for the future. Let me see, where was I? In other words, the black and poor favela should be encouraged to listen to funk and not Bach, because that would be cultural oppression. Okay, so this is what, and this is why I get stuck when I start talking about this topic, because I understand anything that comes out of the poor and black communities, the society at large is going to degrade it. It's going to insult it. This is not culture. This is not music. Remember, this is something that was always said about hip hop, if you remember. So how do we look at some culture and say, well, that's not music, but then the other one says, well, this is music. This is what kids should be listening to. And it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to just look at only one side. Like I said, I'm kind of stuck in the middle on this topic. Many years ago, I'm continuing with the Quora article. Many years ago, I joked with colleagues in the office singing, "I just want to be happy, walk quietly in the favela where I was born." And they laughed, asking, "But what is this?" I laughed too, because it was a novelty. No one knew. We could hardly imagine that from the most puerile music, we would arrive at this here. Okay, so that's the end of that first article. This goes into the second one, which is even a little bit more critical of what's going on with what we call cultura funky. This goes into the article called Funk and the Animalization of Society. And that's taken from this article right here. O funk e a animalização da sociedade is what it's called. And as you can see, you have kids participating in this funk culture, so it's a question like, okay, is this something you really want your kids emulating? So it's this article is by a group called the Cavaleiros da Imaculada. So the article goes, we recently observed a social media campaign entitled Eu luto pelo fim da cultura do estupro, meaning I fight for the end of rape culture. But does that culture really exist? Or is it simply a slogan of feminist militancy against patriarchy? I will prove in this article that no, although it was created with the intention of fighting against patriarchy, in fact, such a culture exists and is right before our eyes, or rather our ears. In fact, our culture suffers from an intense and violent rape culture, a culture that considers a woman as a cadela, meaning the B word, or a safada, loosely meaning like naughty, shameless somebody, that must be beaten and treated like a prostitute. This subculture acts through music as a kind of poison distilled in the ears and later in the hearts of an entire society, leading it to moral, social, intellectual, and spiritual degeneration. In Brazil, this subculture goes by the name of funky. Now, we say funk, they say funky, all right? Such a musical style represents the most abject demonstration of the animalization of the human being, and incredibly, in many cases, is considered by the feminist movement as a sign of empoderamento femenino, meaning feminine or female empowerment. Now, where have we heard that before? When you go on, this is another, huge flag speaking point coming out of feminists in Brazil. What you call empoderamento feminino, which is a feminine empowerment, women empowerment, right? So they're connecting the mulheres da funk, mulheres no funk, women in the funk, the girls of the funk, and female empowerment. Funk is a tool for feminine empowerment. The movimento, or the funk movement, and its influence on feminine empowerment. So you have this all over the place. You just punch these words in, and this is a conversation that's going on online. The connection between, very sexually explicit music, dances, and what they call female empowerment. The process of animalization of society by funk is very simple. First, this is auditory garbage, and it's absorbed by children and or adolescents. Then from the early sexualization influenced by music, they become open to sexual promiscuity, to all kinds of vices, and to immorality in their actions, behaving like animals in heat. With the loss of innocence and purity at such ages, they are open to sexual relations at ages when they should, in fact, be children and adolescents. And even if they maintain relations only as adults, they will be devoid of any shame, responsibility, and sense of sacrifice to understand the beauty of sober and ordered sex within marriage. On the contrary, their hearts will be filled with immorality, irresponsibility, and hedonism, the pursuit of pleasure at all costs. From sexual promiscuity, children are generated in unstable, animalized families that, in the vast majority of cases, are quickly dissolved. There is often no beginning of family. Simply, the children are born from promiscuous relationships. Animalized families generate animalized children. Animalized children generate an animalized society. Regardless of the fact that the funk subculture is only that of banditry. Funk is not culture. It is the lack of culture. It is the complete demonstration that the human being can become worse than beasts, devoid of any intellect and morality. Yes, there are other relevant factors in the bestialization of society, but in Brazilian culture, funk plays a prominent role. So as I was mentioning in the beginning of this piece, there are a lot of people who they don't see this being a positive thing, to contribute to Brazilian society. It's always going to be a question. None of us knows what's going to happen in the future, but the question is, okay, how do you see this? Do you see this as cool? I know in the United States, a lot of people people take issue with seeing women twerking all over the place. I remember seeing a video, I don't know, it might have been a year or two ago, what I saw these women of the Black Lives Matter. And it was a video I saw, some woman that was out in front of the Washington Monument. It's like twerking for freedom. Like, really? Hear about these women twerking on, restaurant tables. And, it's just things are getting out of control. And you can't argue with people about that because people say you're hating. This is about feminine empowerment. This is about, just liberty to do whatever you want. It's just, at what point do you say, enough is enough? That's what the question is. So I just wanted to, put out another video that just shows this is the cultural battle that's going on in Brazil today. People on the left who want to just keep kicking the door down, so that anything goes in society, versus people on the other side that says, hey, how far are we going to go with this? We should abandon this culture because, what's the future of the country if everybody goes in this direction? So this is another reason why I say over the next 4 years, it's going to be intriguing to see where Brazil goes under 4 more years of Lula da Silva. Anyway, so I'm going to leave that there. Again, the title of this article was Brazilian Funk and the Animalization of Society. So hope you enjoyed this one. I'm going to keep them coming because there's a whole lot to unpack when we get into this topic of funk, society, feminism, popular music, women behavior, I want to get into like marriage rates, the decline of marriage, the rise of divorces. This is all going on in Brazil right now. So going to make for some intriguing articles in the future. Anyway, I'm going to end the video here. Definitely leave your comments. Want to know what you think. Did you see any similarities with what you see going on in the United States these days? For those of you who are Brazilians who, understand English, definitely comment below. I want to hear what you have to say about this, what side of the fence you stand on. Drop your comments, subscribe to the channel if you like this video or some previous videos that I've done. Definitely click the notification bell so that you know when I get new videos that I'm going to put up. Share this video. Just want to keep the conversation going because I think there's a lot of things that I talked about in this video that you can definitely make the comparison with, particularly what's going on in the United States today. With that said, I'm going to end the video here and hope you guys tag along for the next one that I put out.